Thank you very much, everyone. So I'm going to start. So disability, innovation and finance. I was thinking about this last night and I decided to start by saying something which is actually scientifically untrue, which I know is a risk in a UCL lecture hall. But that thing that I wanted to start with is that money makes the world go round. And science aside, the phrase does have a point. Money matters. It does things. Investment does things. 80-20-30 is a principal example that investment matters for innovation, assistive technology, design, development, scaling and distribution. It matters for business, technicians, communities, small enterprises to make change, improve access and advance equity. Money also does things for people. For people, it enables them to live and have full and active participation in their society. So human rights. But it's not always accessible, and I don't mean in the sense that there's not an infinite money tree. I really don't. To exemplify, people with disabilities face higher unemployment than those without. On accessing financial services specifically, so from banks, services that make money work for us, be that debit accounts, credit, savings, insurance, barriers are in the way for people with disabilities to gain full and effective benefit on an equal basis with others. Those barriers be that digital channels not meeting accessibility standards, requirements for customers to visually read and sign documents, narrow ATM kiosks and service booths, negative stigma among service staff, and
I'm just going to switch you around.
Oh yeah.
We've got you. It's just could do it being a little bit louder.
No worries. I'm normally too loud, so that's fine.
Never.
And unintuitive service design for spend tracking. So what solutions are there? I'll give one, and the next couple of speakers as well will give some more. And this one is about the fact that there can and should be considered efforts to advance the economic inclusion of people with disabilities, and businesses are a vital mechanism. While there is the business case for this, so with studies proving how disability inclusion is good for business, business is also good for people with disabilities. And that this isn't only just because businesses quite literally have a role to equitably employ and remunerate people, but also, again, using banks as an example, innovative solutions can and should make a difference. For example, mobile apps with facial recognition software, braille and ATM machines, and in-branch induction loops. Inclusive design is important in addressing barriers in physical branches, and also as banks continue to digitalise. I was speaking at lunch today how cash seems to be few and far between at the moment. It's really important that inclusive design principles are considered right now, so that retroactively applying this in the future doesn't mean that we're losing time in terms of access for people with disabilities. So as part of our work at GDI Hub, we have had the great privilege of working with the Asian Development Bank on a project recently. And in this project, we're working with private banks, ADB partner banks across Asia and the Pacific, to understand in-bank barriers to economic inclusion of people with a disability, as well as supporting banks as mechanisms for change. So globally, we also see willingness and opportunity for change. Why is this so? Well, if money does make the world go round, then disability innovation makes that world a very much more joyful place. But what are the mechanisms for change? Drawing from Fernando's talk yesterday, I think part of the solution is actually slowing down. allowing for long-term inclusive decision-making to take precedent over quick, inaccessible gains that businesses all too often deliver. So it's with great pleasure that I will now be passing over to Kathryn Townsend from Nationwide, who will be discussing more about some of the accessible solutions within finance.
Thank you, Polly. Hi, everyone. My name's Kathryn Townsend, and I'm Head of Customer Vulnerability and also Accessibility at Nationwide Building Society, which is the world's biggest building society, if you didn't know that stat. We don't have shareholders, so we are really driven by being there to support our customers in a way that banks just can't, and I think that's really provides a USP for us at Nationwide. Prior to Nationwide, I was at Barclays, which is where I had the pleasure to meet Vicky and Kathy and get involved a little bit in GDI Hub. But I also wear another hat as well. So I'm the UK Cabinet Office, the government's Disability and Access Ambassador for the banking sector. So if you've not heard about the Ambassador Programme, what this is, there's 20 ambassadors across different sectors, so retail, tourism, finance, insurance, and we have a 3-year voluntary role to improve the lives of disabled people relevant to our sector using our skills, knowledge, contacts, experience and passions. So it's my pleasure to be the banking ambassador, and I'm 2 years into that 3-year role. I wanted to set out some priorities as my time as ambassador. There's so much that you could do in this world of making banking more accessible, but how do we not try and boil the ocean? How can I try and be specific? The first priority was around supporting awareness of banking for people with learning disabilities and cognitive difference who often get forgotten about. There's lower levels of advocacy, from my experience, for people with learning disabilities than other forms of neurodiversity and cognitive difference, such as Alzheimer's and dementia. The second priority is around deafness, and that's what I'm going to talk about for a few minutes today. And the third area was around general customer experience and greater consistency of experience, because you can find things called different things on every bank's website, and how do we make it easier for consumers to tell firms what they need and for firms to respond to that. So back to priority number 2, and linking it back to the topic for this session, mechanism for change, I want to just take us back 10 years when I was working at Barclays. And I was in a wider team of like a transformation programme, and that provided the mechanism for change for Barclays to really advance the accessibility agenda. And we had a climate and an environment that provided the resources, the executive sponsorship, the leadership, and the mandate to be different, to be bold, to be innovative, and to really make Barclays move forward at pace to become more accessible to our customers. And one of the solutions we developed at the time, and they were the first bank to do this, was British Sign Language virtual interpretation for deaf people. So this is use of a third-party provider, a real person, a bit like today, to provide interpretation for a deaf person from home, but calling the bank and relaying that conversation. We were the first to do it, and it was really innovative at the time. Trying to get that done in a bank is blooming difficult, because you are talking about sharing personal information with an interpreter. So the risk and governance teams are like, you want to do what? You know, you can't have a person without a power of attorney who is, hearing customer details. So we had to take people on a journey of understanding the controls in which operators run and operate, interpreters operate, excuse me. So we had internal hurdles to do that. Interestingly, in 10 years of working and seeing virtual interpreters, I have never heard of a case of fraud with an interpreter. I have, however, sadly, heard of many cases of friends and family members defrauding, abusing deaf people and hard of hearing people because that person has had to provide their personal details to friend and family members who have gone on to defraud them or financially abuse them. And that is quite common, and that is why this is so important, so that deaf people have the independence, the means to bank independently without having to provide their details to somebody else. So we launched that, and I honestly thought, great, job done. We've solved banking for deaf people. What's the next challenge? I was wrong, and I freely admit that I was wrong. And a few years later, seeing some complaints and hearing from some individuals, I realised that there was much more to do. And actually, the company that we'd used at the time was deaf-led, and that was really important to us. But it didn't represent the full breadth of deaf and hard of hearing people's needs. And so that was a missed opportunity. So with my platform as ambassador, I've really wanted to shine a spotlight on this. And last December, I hosted a roundtable event for IDPD with Jenny Leigh-Fleury, who's the Chief Accessibility Officer at Microsoft, who herself is deaf. It was an intimate event with deaf people and others to talk about these issues through the lens of banking. At that table was an individual called Anna, who works for the Lending Standards Board, who are an organisation who try to uphold standards within banking. It's a voluntary code, but all of the big firms like Nationwide are signed up to it. And she heard that and she said, I really want to do something. I really want to support this. I've actually got a deaf person in my team who only came out after a year to tell me about his hearing loss. I really want to get behind this. And fast forward 6 months, and they produced an insight report specific to the banking sector to talk about the issues and include a variety of interviews with people with varying degrees of hearing loss to provide a call to action for banks and building societies to close the gaps. So I'm getting behind that, and it's really, really struck a chord. I speak to a lot of my colleagues from across other banks, and they are awoken to the issues that deaf people are facing. Many didn't appreciate that BSL is a deaf person's first language, not English. So saying, oh, but I've sent them a letter, it doesn't work if it's not in sign. But now we have technologies that can produce letters in sign with a QR code that can connect to that. So we have the technologies available, the innovation exists, but we have to be aware of the needs, and we have to have that environment that I talked about, that transformational space that allows resources, executive sponsorship, and the risk and culture environment to recognise that we have to think differently for different audiences. So we've got loads more to do in this space, and I really wish I'd listened to a wider breadth of deaf and hard of hearing people's needs 10 years ago. But we definitely have traction with the financial services industry at the moment in the UK, and I'd love to share that more broadly. And the likes of Valuable 500, interestingly, the highest number of organisations signed up to the Valuable 500 are financial services. 78 of the 500 brands signed up to that pledge. So I think that shows the determination of financial services, and in many ways they are leading in most sectors, but I think that we have the opportunity to provide stewardship to other areas as well, like retail, like healthcare, other areas which, if you remove the banking context, this is about good customer service, it's about accessibility, and it's about inclusion. So I'm all for sharing that best practice, and if we have time, I welcome any questions. I don't know if we...
I think we have time for a question or two, if anyone has any from the audience that they'd like to ask Kat. Yes.
Thank you for the talk. I was just going to say, with the number of retail banks that are closing on local branches, how does this play into the strategy? And because I guess a lot of the sign language real-time service that you said, like we're using today, how would that be accessible online, for example? And just the second part, you mentioned that there's a lot of older people who are struggling with this, and with digital literacy, how is that also part of this problem?
Thank you. Is that working? Yeah. Okay. So I believe that I do believe that face-to-face as an option for people who want that is really important. And Nationwide does have a branch promise commitment to retain in the cities and towns that it's in until 2026. So just to get that plug in there. So I do think it's really important. But for a lot of people on the go, virtual services are really important to connect in. And so making it mobile friendly is important. But how many people here have used live chat? It's a brilliant accessibility tool. It's fantastic. Yes, it still uses English. So if your first language is BSL, it might not be the easiest. But there are things now that are more mainstream that really help plug that gap. But I do think there's still a place for face-to-face. And for ageing population, definitely, I think that this is a big issue. I think there's a bit about language. There are solutions there like live chat, like video banking as well. If you need to lip read, if you can't use BSL but you can lip read, things like video banking prevalence are really important. But there's a language bit, because an older person, from research I've seen, they're not looking at the word accessibility. They don't identify with that. You have to talk about, do you have problems hearing? Do you have problems seeing? And then so you've got to access different audiences with different language.
Thank you so much, and yeah, thanks. I could speak on this topic for a long time, as my colleagues know, but without further ado, I believe that we are handing over to